up, you guys? Welcome back to Couchin Courtside. My name is Johnny, and I'm always joined here with John. John, how are we doing today?
Hey, Johnny, I'm doing good. How about yourself, man?
Doing pretty good. So, got a lot of things to talk about. So, let's just get right into it. I think one of these articles you showed me a couple weeks back was kind of very interesting to see, which was about the Nuggets and how Mike Malone kind of runs his practices. They use what they call spectrum scoring in practice, and basically all it does is kind of emphasize the will of how they play the games. When they shoot corner threes, or they shoot shots at the rim, they get 4 points each. Mid range shots are worth only 1 point. Now, that seems very bizarre coming from an age that we grew up in, but analytics kind of show that threes are much more valuable. Same thing with driving to the basket because it's an easy shot. If not, you get free throws, which is also a plus, right? You're trying to ease your ways through it. I have a thing about analytics. It's always helped us kind of advance our sport, but I do not know if basketball is going in the way of football, which, with the use of analytics, at least in football terms, passing has opened up the floodgates to offenses. We see coaches taking more chances on fourth and inches, which sounds really ridiculous in hindsight, but it's an inch. Why don't you take your shot and try to get it? Because it's not like a full yard or two. But those things have led to greater offenses, more scoring, and dare I say, like a better product that's on the field, or analytics going towards the view of baseball. And with baseball, there's a strikeout or a home run. There's no in betweens anymore. In the 90s, early 2000s, we're used to people stealing bases, drawing walks, the Barry Bonds type of level of hitter, same thing like Cal Ripken Jr. People hitting singles and doubles, playing small ball doesn't work anymore. And so we're given this all or nothing in baseball, which really makes it very boring to watch because you're either seeing a team strike out 19 times in a game, or you're going to see 10 home runs, right? And there's just no variation to it. John, with the way NBA is working with their analytics, where do you think we're going to side when it comes to the sport itself?
I'm glad you mentioned baseball because, as you just mentioned, that has been a sport that I don't want to say that analytics has kind of mired the sport of baseball or marred the state of baseball, but as you just alluded to a moment ago, it's tough to watch on TV, right? And what really makes baseball go is the fact that it has the advertising dollars from all the different networks to ensure that it's on TV all the damn time. For basketball, though, I think we're going to see more of the same. We witnessed a great success from the Maury Ball for the Rockets, right? Even though they didn't win a championship, they made it pretty damn close. I know we had a couple of comments about James Harden and Chris Paul over the past couple of weeks here, but the very fact of basically looking at the effective field goal rate, right? Guys who shoot more threes being worth more than twos, it makes sense for guys to hoist and jack up more threes than typical. So just kind of give you a bit of insight on this here. Looking at this article actually from Forbes, the average field goal percentage at the rim is 63%, 63 and a half. So let's call it 64%. For mid range, it's 40.3%. And for three pointers, it's 36%. And then for corner threes, it's nearly 40% at 39%. Excuse me. So obviously, with the fact that we're looking at mid range and corner threes, the corner three is what, 22 and a half feet, right? So
Correct. Yes.
it's a pretty short three compared to a mid range from the top of the key at the same distance is going to only net you 2 points versus three. So the points per shot that you're getting from a 2 point shot in the NBA for a mid range is 0.81, whereas the points per shot that you're getting in the NBA from a corner three is 1.17. I mean, as we have noticed, the number of people or number of guys who are jacking up threes, this is only going to be a trend that's going to be continuing. In 2019, so let's look at this really quickly again, the same article. Going from 2015 to 2020, the number of three-pointers by percentage per team has gone up just precipitously. In 2015, we're looking at about 24.4% of shots were all three-pointers. At that time, nearly 40% of all shots were two-pointers. So not at the rim, but actually a two-point mid-range shot. They actually bisected each other in 2019. So there was an equilibrium where the number of shots from the three was 34%. I'm sorry, just above 30%. And it was still 34%. But right now in 2020, guys are shooting 35.5% of their shots from the three. So we're only going to see this trend continue based off of the fact that, again, a 3-point shot is worth more than two, and because of the corner three, that is going to make it a lot more prevalent for every team, especially as big guys want to make sure they stay relevant in the league as well.
I hear you. It's funny. The tweet that I got, the first reply that I saw was, "No wonder Millsap is taking horrendous threes right now," which I thought was pretty funny because he is taking some really bad threes.
Let me say this about Millsap though, and I don't mean to interrupt you. I don't know if you recall, there was a game that Millsap played for when he was in I think Utah versus the Miami Heat. I want to say back in 2012. And I think that prior to that game, Millsap had taken 4 threes in his entire career. And he hit like 8 or 9 threes in that game. And they eventually came back and they beat the Heat in that game. And from there, it was basically history. That guy has been a chucker ever since.
Yeah, it doesn't look good at times, but yeah, that shit was really funny. Following on this delineation, Kirk Goldsberry, ESPN, he wrote a really good article about how if we're going to embrace 3-point line and the shooting, how can we use the analytics to kind of fix this game? So, a couple of factoids that he shared is prior to the 2015-16 season, not one single NBA player has ever made 300 3-point field goals in one entire season. Curry finished with 402 that season. Harden is also right now the all-time leader in unassisted threes made. The dude is 29 years old, right? So there's a lot of things that's advancing really quickly. There's history behind this, right? In 1951, the Mikan rule was applied because he was dominating the post, so they doubled the width of the court.
Mm-hmm.
13 years later, they widened the lane again. Why? Because Wilt Chamberlain was dominating the court. 1979, that's when we introduced the 3-point shot that was added. So Goldsberry introduced 4 different options that we can kind of use to kind of not only negate the 3-point shot, but kind of bring back the semblance of what we know and love about basketball. John, can you talk about the 4 options that he kind of presented?
Yeah, let's look at these here. So the very first one is custom lines. And this is the one that I think I love the most, although I don't think it's the one that's most practical. Consider just giving every single team their own home court advantage, if you will, right? The only teams in the NBA right now that I think enjoy a real home court advantage. You're looking at the Nuggets based off of their altitude, and maybe based off of just the way that the arena is actually set up. The Utah Jazz, right? Those are the 2 teams where when you think of a home court advantage, those guys actually have a real home court advantage. But what this the author is actually suggesting here is let's say you have a situation where you want to make the 3-point line either further back or give it a different shape, right? Make it oblong, move it inward. Or you could even do something like the Utah Jazz, right? Because obviously, again, Rudy Gobert just got $200+ million. Well, Rudy can't make threes. So what if you just get rid of the 3-point line entirely? So that's one of the things there. He was suggesting that perhaps maybe the Golden State Warriors, being a great 3-point shooting team, could actually move their 3-point line out further, right? Because Steph has no issues with shooting 30+ foot threes, neither would a Damian Lillard. But maybe a guy who's just a middle of the road 3-and-D guy, maybe like a Spencer Dinwiddie. Sorry about your ACL, Spencer. Would have issues shooting from that distance, and so that would give the Warriors an inherent advantage, right, over their opponent. The second one he's calling the data-driven line, and this one here is based off of the mean average of the 33% rule for a 3-point shot. So basically, based off of this hit here, they can either move the line inward or backward based off of how well players are actually shooting from that distance. So again, using a team like the Golden State Warriors, as well as a bunch of other teams, if teams are shooting too high of a percentage from that clip, meaning from the 23.9 3-point line, then basically they can move it backwards to basically accommodate the fact that people are shooting too well from where it is. So he's suggesting that maybe we can move it back from 23 to 24 feet or 24 to 25 feet. And basically, as you move it back, you're basically getting further and further into the sweet spot. And so, basically what he has in here is between 27 and 28 feet and 26 and 27 feet. That's where the 33% will actually lie for these players here. And then additionally, he was talking about the corner three. And I think that this one is one that is actually really near and dear to me. The corner three is a really interesting thing. We talked about this, briefly to kind of get this podcast going. And he does talk about which I think is the greatest shot in the history of the NBA, which is Ray Allen's shot in Game 6 of the Heat Spurs Finals in 2013.
Save LeBron's legacy.
Let's not get crazy. Let's remember that LeBron James had to get them there. But this one here, basically, what he's talking about is it just doesn't make sense for shooters to be able to just kind of sit in that spot there because of the distance of it relative to the rest of the 3 point line. And so he's basically talking about not necessarily elongating, but actually making the 3 point arc an actual semicircle rather than being like what it is today. I can't even think of like what I would call the shape of the 3 point line, but basically that additional area underneath the arc basically needs to be pushed back to actually accommodate to give an advantage to again teams that can't shoot as well. And so yeah, so Johnny, what are your thoughts on just those three so far before we get into the fourth one?
Two I like, one I love. So let's start with the ones I like. I actually don't mind, and this seems the most practical, which is the data driven one, which is analyze where people were shooting the three prior to that year and then readjust everyone's
Mm.
shooting distance beforehand. I think the idea is to get to that 33.3% mean. Simply because if it's higher, we're going to see more clips, therefore more shooting, and it might not driven the other way around. So I think having that mean actually works. I also like the idea of blocking off 3 point corners. So now, since it's much shorter, since they're drawing that kind of imaginary line there, it desensitivizes people to just stay in the corner because it doesn't make sense anymore. So it gets the team rotating, things like that. The ballpark custom three is something that's very far fetched, but I think that is the best because we talk about home court advantage. Yes, fans make up of that depending on their fan base. But really, outside of, like you said, Denver and its altitude, there really isn't so much of a home court, more or less, in terms of what you can do. Baseball, comparing this to baseball, I actually like because you go to different ballparks, and I would say let's compare Colorado, which is, in Denver, or, in Colorado, right? And then let's do the Padres. Colorado, with the altitude, the air, and the way the fences are, a lot of people hit home runs there. It's a fact. It's a given. That's why ERAs that are there, when they look at the pitchers' ERAs, they don't really take too much of counting to it because they know they're going to give up more runs. Conversely, when you think about Petco Park in San Diego, that is one of the hardest stadiums to hit a home run out of, simply because of wherever the stadium is, but the way the fences move in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying you give carte blanche to everybody, because if you did, a team like the Utah Jazz would probably eliminate their 3 point line in Utah altogether, because this would be an advantage to Rudy Gobert and how they play offense, or defensively takes advantage of his prowess. But if you set a median from, like I said, I think the average is 25 feet to begin with,
Right.
and you go to 33, and they can customize it from there on out, I think that actually would be the better option. It gives the teams to kind of control how they practice, but then at the same time, now they're kind of telling everybody, hey, especially let's say the Warriors, for example, if they're the ones pushing their 3 pointers back to 33 feet, can you imagine if you have to go into that actual stadium and you're like, crap, I got to step back 2 extra feet just to shoot this shot? It really then now makes people try to work for their best shot rather than just trying to take a shot that realistically can give them more points per shot.
Absolutely. And just imagine from the perspective of that, like a Cavaliers team led by LeBron not being a historically great 3 point shooter, but if his line was, let's say, 20 feet versus again 33 feet in Golden State. Yes, they play more games by virtue of the fact that Golden State would have home court advantage because they have more wins for the season. But allowing the Cavs and LeBron James to try to get more attempts up and score more points from a closer 3 point would actually be a really interesting prospect. You could also again get guys who might be able to shoot a mid range shot like a Tristan Thompson, or maybe even like a Draymond Green. Well, I know he's on the opposing team, but that would give those guys a better opportunity to make a shot as well. The fourth and final opportunity he was talking about here, or change he was proposing here, was perhaps doing like FIBA and just or Euroball and allowing goaltending on threes. And I find this one to be really interesting as well because we all know that over the last 10 to 15 years, more so towards the 10, the big man has actually been dying in the NBA, right? We had guys like Big Al Jefferson, who used to be considered to be excellent, great players who had a great mid range shot back to the basket, slow feet, but, had good post moves. All of a sudden just get played out of the NBA. Same thing with the Roy Hibbert, right? The guy went from being an all-star to just basically disappearing overnight. Imagine giving these guys new life. And again, don't take this as me saying that Big Al Jefferson was a great defensive player, but imagine giving these guys new life and allowing them to goaltend on the three. Imagine Rudy Gobert's his value to the Utah Jazz as a 7-footer who can pretty much block anything right now anyway. If he could goaltend every 3-point shot. Imagine Steven Adams, right? He's an overpay. He got overpaid by NOLA, but imagine if he was able to goaltend on every three. So I think this is a really interesting prospect here. Most guys already do this anyway, and it's interesting because the author, he brought up Kevin Garnett after the whistle every single time someone would put up a three, and KG would get up and he would block it because he doesn't want to see that shot go in. But I think this is a really interesting prospect as well. Is it going to happen? Absolutely not. So of the four that probably that are mentioned here, the one that probably has the most likelihood of occurring is the data-driven line, like Johnny was saying, just by virtue of the fact that, again, we want to kind of look at where the average of shots are actually being made, and the league can adjust based off of that. My concern, however, though, Johnny, is that the fans, they love high-scoring games, right? You have the old school guys who might lament the fact that, yeah, it's a situation where guys aren't playing in D or guys are shooting too many 3-point shots. But fans want to see people score. And so if we go from seeing games that are 130 to 129 or to 127 or something like that back to games that are 88 to 85, I think the NBA is in trouble losing viewership that way. What do you think?
Oh, I totally agree with you on that. But I think that's why having either the data driven line or having people do the home court line actually works to their benefit, because we're not saying that we don't mind the high scoring. What we're saying is, I don't want to see the same play over and over again.
For
What
sure.
happens is the fluidity of these games are pretty set. I know when I see, I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure every team, basically what happens is you got your point guard, you got your pick, you got one person in the block, you got two corners. The idea is just to set the pick. Guy comes off the pick. Either if it helps, then you're going to throw the lob to the person that's in the post. If not, you're going to dish it to the two corners. 90% of the game is this,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Drive and
The
kick.
other 5% is in the last fourth quarter with 2 minutes, when every coach in the world decides, outside of Carlisle, Spolstra, and Pop, and I'll throw Kerr in this, where they draw a play, but outside of those guys, they're just going to give the ball to their superstar, clear out, and that's kind of what the game is. But I mean, it's pretty predictable what these offenses are for the most part. So by injecting some of these things, you're still going to get your 3-point shot, because they've now made it so that specialists are specialists,
Mm-hmm.
and someone like Paul Millsap, as we bring him back, isn't just chucking threes because coaches are telling him you should chuck it. No, now we bring back people that are the Kyle Korvers of the world, that actually are there because they do have a specialist thing for them to do, rather than make everybody play like Kyle Korver.
Absolutely. And I want to bring up one more thing. And I know that it wasn't a part of this article, and I thought that it was. And so I apologize that it actually escaped me. But there was also a different article that I read as well. Again, basically focused on primarily 3-point shots. And this one I thought was actually a really interesting proposal. And the proposal was a 5-second rule for corners. So we have a 3-second illegal defense rule, right, where a defender cannot be within the lane for longer than 3 seconds if they're not within arm's distance of their defender. Same thing for an offensive player as well. You have a 5-second back to the basket rule. Of course, we have an 8-second rule for backcourt violation uh, prior to, moving the basketball into the front court. But he was basically saying, imagine if you had a 5-second rule for guys just standing in corners. And Johnny, you brought up the fact that you want to increase the fluidity of the game. You have a situation where you have guys who can just break down the defense. Kyrie Irving, Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, Kevin Durant. Dennis Schroeder, right? Guys that can break down the offense. And what you're seeing is you're seeing a bunch of guys just actually standing there in the corner. And as you just had mentioned or elucidated, these guys literally are specialists. All they do is shoot the three. What do you think happens to these guys in the event that there's a 5-second rule where you actually need to move out of a specific zone? In this case here, being the corner, right? Because it is a shorter three. What are your thoughts on if they did something like that? Does that help or hurt the game?
Helps because everyone now starts moving.
Yeah.
Now, that means defenses have a slight advantage because they know that they can't stand in a corner,
Mm-hmm.
just like defensive people can't stand in the paint for more than 3 seconds, or offensive people can stand in the paint more for 3 seconds as well. My biggest thing is I just want to see more fluidity of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are still trying to kind of run that. The Heat are a very good example of doing that, but even then, there is still a lot of times where people are expected to sit in the corner. I don't mind if, like the Warriors, the way they play is they move the ball and they shoot threes. I'm okay with that because they're still trying to execute an offense that makes everybody move. What I'm not okay with, and this is very representative when I play 2K with all the guys against a team that doesn't need to be at the rec, but they should be playing pro am, is that you have a point guard that's trying to do a curry slide left and right, but I have two bigs just sitting in the corner, one's waiting there and they're not doing anything. But that is, as much as that's kind of like a meta in what 2K is doing, it really is what the NBA is doing as well right now. And so the better rules that we can come up to get more fluidity, the better it is. Now, there's other circumstances as well, like Trey Young just cutting fouls left and right because he's getting people to run over him, shit like that, right? But that's a whole different ball game. I think the whole threes is a very analogous to how baseball is with home runs and strikeouts. It's like sometimes it's all or nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and the only people that could shoot mid-range shots are the superstars of the game that can get their own, like Kawhi, Durant, AD, Joker can be on there as well. But
Yeah.
those are the only guys that are allowed to take that shot without it being called a bad shot.
Right.
Everyone else that takes a mid-range shot, it's considered a bad shot these days, and that's something that I don't feel like should be viewed as, because if we do, you're never going to see the Rip Hamiltons of the world again. And he is
Mm-hmm.
an excellent player. Like, those are the players I miss that really uses their screens and then, makes the defender tired and then kind of takes offense. It's an offense defensive game, right? JJ Redick's of the world, I feel like he is a dying breed. Everything else is just kind of spot up, shoot, and then only need one person to break people off the dribble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some really important points there. I guess one of the things that you'd have to take into consideration as well is, well, what constitutes a corner three, right? Is it just the extreme corners, or how do you draw an additional line in the court to make it so that it's a visual or a visible thing, or do you want to leave it up to the refs, the very same refs who didn't call Kevin Durant out of bounds when he saved that ball versus Houston when he was clearly out of bounds? So you want it to be something that is not subjective; it has to be objective. So you would have to actually draw more lines on the court, which may or may not be a good idea, but generally speaking, I think I'm with you. I would love for there to be more fluidity, like a Greg Popovich team or like a Warriors team where guys are just playing beautiful basketball, setting screens, popping off, rolling to the basket, XYZ. Love those ideas.
With all these rules, still wouldn't save Kelly Oubre this season when it comes to 3-point shooting.
I saw a stat that basically said that the Warriors are 18th right now in 3-point percentage, and if Kelly Oubre didn't take a single three, they'd be fourth in the league in 3-point percentage. Just sit on that for a moment.
Look, the man got his money. I don't disregard anybody getting their money. They're worth what they're paid. Man's trash. All right. I'm telling you right now, the stats you saw in Phoenix are just empty stats. I'm telling you guys this right now. People keep trying to sell them to me on fantasy. I'm like, I don't want them. No, there's certain players in fantasy basketball I do not want. He is one of them. You can stick with him.
All time empty stats guy.
Oh, Zach Randolph, dude. If you're talking all-time empty stats, it is Zach Randolph.
I don't know.
Until he finally got, until Marc Gasol got there and they finally got to the playoffs. Up until that point, with him, with the Trailblazers, and then his early stint in Memphis, he is the ultimate empty stats guy.
How could,
I
how could
would throw David Lee in
I was
there
about
as
to
well,
say
and
that.
I
I was
love
about to
David
say,
Lee.
how could
Yeah,
you not mention David Lee?
Yeah, I love David Lee. That man was a double double, but those Knicks didn't win shit.
They didn't win no damn.
I love the man, but again,
Absolutely.
great in fantasy, not so much for real life in the NBA.
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, don't look now. The Warriors are 6-4. So, I mean, maybe Uber's doing something right.
He isn't. Curry is doing something right. I'll tell you that. And I will say this, and I'll harken it back a little bit from what we talked about last week. And you guys kind of were right with Draymond being a very vocal leader and how he has improved them defensively. What I've noticed the last couple of games with the Warriors is that Wiggins, he's starting to find himself in this offense, which I'm kind of glad he is. But defensively, this man can't think for himself, right? But Draymond Green yelling at him what to do has actually made him a better defender. Like now he doesn't have to think. It's because Draymond's thinking for him. And you can kind of see, like I was very impressed when they were playing the Clippers a couple nights ago. He has to guard Kawhi, but Kawhi wasn't really torching him left and right. Like he was kind of containing as much as he possibly can. But a lot of it is because Draymond knows where each person defensively should be at.
Hmm.
And I can see the total impact that Draymond has on the defensive end for that team that needs direction.
Mm-hmm.
And Curry's just Curry, dude. Like, I'm flabbergasted at how great of a shooter he really is
Well,
of all time.
let's give credit where credit is due. Stephen Curry is one of the greatest players in the history of the NBA, bar none. Not just one of the greatest shooters, but one of the greatest players as well. And it's easier for me to say this now, now that he doesn't have a super team. But let me say this about Draymond too. I mean, we were just talking about all time teams. Draymond is an all time teammate, right? The guy, as you just mentioned, he is a leader through and through. Even though Stephen Curry and Clay were the guys who were making the shots, I mean, he made the offenses run. And so it's really just impressive to watch a guy like him, basically, again, just be the engine of the team. And also, he can stand up and get guys, he can put guys where they need to be, defensively and offensively. And I want to say something else about Kawhi as well, because you mentioned that Kawhi wasn't necessarily torching him. As Kawhi has had to pick up more and more of the offensive duties for his team, we've noticed that his defense has begun to regress. And this isn't a dig or a knock at Kawhi. It's something that happens to everyone, right? As you are expected to do more on one side of the ball, the other side of the ball diminishes as well. But it just also does go to show that Kawhi, he played on historically great teams. He played on that Spurs team where he won in 2014, right? Where he was the finals MVP, despite the fact that he scored 18 points per game. I'm just going to leave that out there. And he also played for that Raptors team as well. That was a great team. They made it to the semifinals, semis last year without Kawhi, and with a terrible, terrible, terrible Pascal Siakam last year. So just imagine, if they had another star on their team, it doesn't even have to be Kawhi. They would have made it probably just as far, if not further. So it just goes to show that Kawhi has been on stacked teams pretty much his entire career.
When John and I were coming up with the concept of this show, it was just us kind of pretending as if we were sitting by side, because we used to do this a lot and just talking about basketball, music, movies, life in general. One of the things I've always thought about is that, a lot of these shows, sponsorship or not, they don't really go political unless it's the actual political avenue, simply because they don't want to alienate viewers, listeners, because they have sponsorships, things like that. We don't have any sponsorships, and I wrestled it with it sometimes, but I want to make sure that, to be honest with everyone that listens to us, is that we actually talk about things that we normally would with day to day. So on January 6th, it was my day off. I have that Wednesday, that Thursday off. I kissed my wife goodbye as she left to work. I was thinking to myself, I'm going to make some dinner. I went to Target to run some errands. Came home, swept all of my cat's litter. He's just spewing around everywhere, which reminds me, wooden floors makes it easier to clean up, but I just noticed it a lot more now. But, I'm doing all this. And then it was like 10 o'clock our time. And I was thinking to myself, oh, they're doing the certification process, the Capitol. I kind of want to watch this, just to kind of see what it is, because I know it happens every 4 years when they certify electors, but I never really watched it. And then now I know that 13 or 16 different senators, along with a various bunch of Republicans, want to object to the certification on certain states. The goal is to do four, from what the Times read, 2 hours per. So that was been an 8 to 10 hour delay of Biden becoming certified as president, which is supposed to be a formality at this point.
Right.
So I watch it. We get through the states and we get to Arizona.
Mhm.
I don't know who the representative was, but he said he objected because there's voter fraud. He believes in 4 states. Bunch of Republicans were clapping because they're doing it, right? And so they kind of break off, and then we kind of start seeing everybody on one side or the other side talk, either the House or the Senate. I was more interested in the Senate because, as much as the House has a lot more seats, a lot more representatives that happen, there's only 2 senators per state, so their window is a little bit smaller. So a lot of their talking to be more vocal. McConnell comes out, talks about how he wants to accept what the American people have said. We really can't start this precedent. Why? Because if we do, then every 4 years it's about power. And, how are we going to get American people to trust our elections if the loser is always going to be the one saying that there's always fraud?
Hmm.
Then comes out Ted Cruz spewing his bullshit that's out there left and right about just give me 10 days with a bunch of people. That way, we can just double check and make sure everything is all right.
Hmm.
Even though, as we now know, every single court document that has been filed since Election Day has been rejected in court because there is no evidence whatsoever that these elections have been fraudulent whatsoever. Then we see the mob, the protests coming in, and an insurrection happens. That's something that I was visibly never seen before. And it kind of ruined how mentally my day was the rest of it. I was kind of sad, I was angry, I was frustrated because there was a lot of things that were happening on that day. John, I know I text you when you were on a meeting during when McConnell was talking, but how did you experience that whole day?
The first thing I want to say is let's not let Josh Hawley of Missouri off of the hook either, because a lot of his rhetoric and actions directed towards the electoral process directly brought the sentiments and behavior that we saw on Wednesday. It was really just it kind of like I don't want to call it an out of body experience, but it's one of those things that you don't know what you're looking at until you actually take time to think about it. And what kind of just blows me away is just, you have a a group of people in our country who always talk about states' rights. States' rights. The state should be able to do this. We don't want the federal government interfering, in the state's ability to decide something. But here you have both Josh Hawley as well as Ted Cruz, who basically are the spearheads of this objection of the certification process, objecting to states with which they don't represent, stirring up the anger. And I'm going to be honest as well. I'm going to use the F word, the fear that a lot of these people actually have, that they feel that their election was actually stolen from them, but offering no proof. And as you just had elucidated, Johnny, just asking for quote unquote more time. So as you mentioned, I'm sitting in a meeting and, I get a text from you. I get a text from one of my colleagues at work and like, hey, man, you got to turn on CNN. And I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. I'm thinking it's just going to be some BS. But then, I go to the website and I'm seeing thousands upon thousands of people standing on the Capitol, on the Capitol grounds. And, there's photos of people or video of people climbing up the walls of the Capitol, breaking the glass of the Capitol, chanting, putting up nooses. Johnny, it was an absolutely surreal experience. And as you just mentioned as well, it ruined my day because I am not one who's ever for the destruction of property. I didn't agree with it back during the riots over the summer following George Floyd's death and following the shooting of Jacob Blake. People have property and they own property and they have a right to make sure that their property is not defaced, defamed, or broken down. But we did notice that during those largely peaceful protests in DC and other places in the United States, the president didn't hesitate one whim to make sure that he was protected by having as many authority figures there as possible to make sure that he essentially punished the people who were going against his rhetoric. And it was a stark contrast, an alarming contrast to the people who were behaving this way, these rioters. I'm not going to call them protesters in the Capitol. These people were rioters on the 6th. And as you had mentioned, Johnny, these people, they were mounting a insurrection against the Capitol. It's absolutely galling, and I'm learning more and more things about it now, and it still just blows me away.
There's a lot that I kind of take, and let's look at it through a big eyed lens, right? You talk about Black Lives Matter during the summer when it came to George Floyd, Jacob Blake. Yes, there's people that will always take advantage when it comes to the looting. Riots, we want to say will never happen when it comes to large people protests, but you know, those are kind of happen. Those are people that kind of take that type of advantage that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, a majority of them were peaceful, and not just in the US. We're talking about other countries that were doing this because they noticed something that is systemically wrong within the US and are trying to point it out.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a blind spot in America that just doesn't absolutely see it. Now, you've seen these pictures around, and we remember the image as well is when they were doing a protest for Black Lives Matter. What did the president do? Called out the National Guard. You can see all of them on the steps, ready to shoot first and ask questions later, right? And everyone's peaceful. So shocking to me that when we turn on the news and we see people on the Capitol pushing through these barricades and pushing through the actual building itself. I mean, I'm going to say it, if they were black, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't even step one step onto that actual building. Am I wrong to assume this? Because
No.
we have evidence from seeing prior that really doesn't, right? Where's the rubber bullets? Where's the tear gas that we see that we don't,
And
right?
and that's such an excellent point, Johnny. I mean, as the day unfolded, and mind you, this entire scene lasted for in excess of 4 hours. So over this time frame, I'm getting text messages from my friends. Some of them aren't people of color. Some of them are white, right? And they're asking the exact same questions you are. Where's the tear gas? Where are the non-lethal bullets that they were shooting at people here? Even in very neutral San Diego, they were doing the exact same thing during the BLM protests. Where were those things to protect the people's house? They were nowhere to be found. There were videos circulating on Reddit, on Twitter, of police officers basically just allowing these protesters to walk by. There were reports that indicated that when the mayor Muriel Bowser wanted to actually call in the National Guard, she was put on hold for 20, 30, 40 minutes, and they were basically telling her you don't have the authorization for that. And so during this time, her police officers have been completely overwhelmed. Some of which may have been participatory. I don't want to speculate, but they were completely overwhelmed, and yet and still they were still being denied the access to the very same people, as Johnny just mentioned, were there on the very same steps when Trump wanted to have a photo op for law and order. Show me any photograph or video of what happened on January 6th, 2020, and tell me what was law and orderly about that.
Yeah, you're not going to see one. And, it's just haunting to see images of a Confederate flag, a
Mm.
symbolism of what slavery was in our pastime, into the steps of that building. That's never happened before. We got people wearing Camp Auschwitz sweaters that are coming in here. Like
6 minutes not enough.
it's something that they just fundamentally can't see. And this is kind of, like I said, I'm not white. You're not white. So we've never ever preconceived our notions that we were always the majority, right? We've always been in the minority. We never assumed that we were anywhere in the majority. But with the way the landscape is changing, you know, some of these white people are scared because it's changing really quickly
Hmm.
up to that point. There's a reason why Georgia flipped, right? It isn't because of voter fraud. It's because now people that have done grassroots, like Stacey Abrams, have made it to where we can get voter turnout at a high level, that they can get access to those voting stations, and we're seeing
Hmm.
slowly what happens when you kind of put that. They talk about democracy when we signed the Declaration of Independence. Really, to me, I don't think democracy in America actually happened until the 60s, when the Voting Rights Act actually became law.
Right.
That to me is when America really became America, because now technically everybody has
Equal
the
rights.
same equal rights, has the
Right.
same votes.
Right.
That's so if we take away that part before that act that had that amendment happen until now, of course you're going to see a bigger change, and it's happening as it goes. One of my biggest things that I've also taken away, outside of just seeing the contrast of how cops were there or how policing was happening, really is how social media has taken uh they decided to take a back seat through all this
Mm.
recently, until Twitter, Facebook started flagging stuff for being
Hmm.
insidious, or
Hmm.
fact checking things and that. But at that point, it was a little bit too late, right? We kind of have all this happen because now there's so much disinformation out there
Yeah.
that kind of happens. And one of the things that really angered me was, after all this happened, and as it's happening, and then, when we got tonight, when the Senate and the House started meeting again to get through their process, we have people on messengers, Facebook's like, hey, that wasn't all Trump people. There's Antifa people there, stuff like that. And really, that really kind of shows you a little bit of the delusion that this cult really has, that they've ingrained in themselves, that like they're not the ones doing anything wrong. It's everyone else that's out there to get them.
Absolutely. And the sad thing is that, these people, they're not just on Twitter. They're people that we know as well. They're people that either we work with, or in some cases family members, who are making these comments to us. And it's really unfortunate because, as you just alluded to, there's so much misinformation out there. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that, and I don't mean to be ageist, but you know, our generation, we grew up understanding that, you know, when going to college, you need three sources for something, right? You shouldn't get all of you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, but you also shouldn't just trust the word of one news outlet or one website, one social media place. You should probably cross reference and cross check things. And if it isn't being reported by multiple sources, then there's a high likelihood that it's not true. I think that a lot of people who are in the cohort that are behind us, and I won't name them by what generation they are, but they don't really take the time to consider that just because something is posted online, it doesn't make it necessarily fact or true. A lot of times it's an opinion, and you need to actually search for the facts. One thing that kind of just bothers me as well, Johnny, that I'll say too, is just in all of this here over the last couple of days, because as a result of this cascading of events, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, um, Google, Apple have begun to start deplatforming a lot of these. Let's call them what they are. These individuals who are basically engaging in seditious acts. Donald Trump was kicked off of Twitter. So was Michael Flynn. So was Donald Trump's quote unquote attorney, who represents him sometime but doesn't represent him all the time. Google and Apple got rid of Parler. But what you're seeing from this is you're seeing people basically saying that they're silencing my voice. No, we're not silencing your voice. What we're trying to do is make sure that you aren't out there gathering and putting together meets and meetings to basically cause bodily harm to people. I mean, Johnny, I don't know if you saw this, but one of the chants that they had at the House, meaning these writers, they were saying, hang Mike Pence. Hang Mike Pence. I don't agree with a lot of what Mike Pence does, but I also don't agree that Mike Pence should be hanged. The man should be protected as the vice president of the United States of America. And to me, it's just unbelievable that these types of behaviors could actually be prevalent on these platforms, and they're not actually taking any sort of steps to stop these things from occurring.
Yeah, and better late than never, I would say. At the same time, to every single person that thinks that this is a censorship of their freedom of speech, everyone that ever says that when it comes to this needs to reevaluate and relearn what the hell freedom of speech is. All right.
Correct.
That shit is supposed to be protect you from the government so the government doesn't censor you.
Exactly.
Twitter, Facebook, any of these social platforms, they're a private company. And when you signed up with them, there are terms and conditions that they have there. So if they want to get rid of you, shit, they got rid of you.
Right.
That's not their fault. You didn't follow to what they're doing.
Right.
If you were so inclined to do so, then go ahead, make your own platform, kind of do it out there. But it's going to be very hard for you to try to get the same base as you have when it comes to these things here. To the likes of Twitter, or Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, that can happen.
Absolutely.
Also think it's freaking hilarious that Trump tried to get TikTok banned, and Trump was the first one banned out of all of this stuff. It's just pretty funny that kind of happens.
Right. Let me say this too, Johnny. Just one more thing on freedom of speech. Freedom of speech it also does not abscond you of freedom from consequences. Right. So again, freedom of speech protects you from a governmental or municipal entity, but not from a private company. But even if you are in a movie theater, you can't just yell fire. If you do, someone might beat your ass if there actually is not indeed a fire because you're trying to incite a riot or fear in people, especially after what happened with Dark Knight in Colorado, right? People aren't playing that shit nowadays. But one more thing I'll say about freedom of speech as well is that your freedoms as an individual to do and say what you believe in, those things stop or end when they infringe upon my own personal safety. When your freedoms infringe on my safety, it is no longer freedom of speech. You're basically committing an act against me, a tort against me, and I have the right to say, nah, you can't do that. And that is what Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, Google, and Apple, which I'm surprised was the latest person or the latest company to do it, seeing how vanilla and milquetoast they are. That's what they were basically doing. They're saying that your freedoms to say and do these things, they stop when they are causing harm to other people.
I'm gonna read a little article here. Got posted on Associated Press, AP News a while back, just to let you guys know, kind of like the follow up and how serious this is. If anyone thought, "Oh, good, at least they did something to invade the Capitol," right? So let me see. So the Associated Press reviewed social media posts, voter registrations, court files, and other public records for more than 120 people either facing criminal charges related to the January 6th unrest or who, going maskless amid the pandemic, were later identified through photographs and videos taken during the melee. The evidence gives lies to claims by right-wing pundits and Republican officials, such as Representative Matt Gaetz from Florida, that the violence was perpetrated by left-wing Antifa thugs rather than supporters of the president. Steve Antoni, the assistant director in charge of FBI's Washington field office, told reporters that investigators had seen no indication Antifa activists were disguised as Trump supporters in Wednesday's riots. The AP found that many of the rioters had taken to social media after the November election to retweet and parrot false claims by Trump that the vote had been stolen in a vast international conspiracy. Several had openly threatened violence against Democrats and Republicans they considered insufficiently loyal to the president. During the riots, some live streamed and posted photos of themselves at the Capitol. Afterwards, many bragged about what they had done. Among them was Lonnie Leroy Kaufman, 70, an Alabama grandfather who drove to Washington to attend Trump's Save America rally in a red GMC Sierra pickup, packed with an M4 assault rifle, multiple loaded magazines, 3 handguns, and 11 mason jars filled with homemade napalm, according to court filings. Truck was found during a security sweep involving explosive sniffing dogs after two pipe bombs were found and disarmed Wednesday near the national headquarters of the Republican and Democratic parties. Kaufman was arrested that evening when he returned to the truck carrying a 9mm Smith & Wesson handgun, 22 caliber Derringer pistol in his pockets. He's not suspected of planting the pipe bombs, though he is charged with having Molotov cocktails in the bed of his truck. Also facing charges is Cleveland Grover Meredith Jr., a Georgia man who, in the wake of the election, had protested outside the home of Republican Governor Brian Kemp, whom Trump had publicly blamed for his loss in the state. Meredith drove to Washington last week for the Save America rally, but arrived late because of a problem with the lights on his trailer, according to court filings that include explicit latent text. This is what the text read. Headed to DC with a shit ton of 5.56 armor piercing ammo. Thinking about heading over to Pelosi speech and putting a bullet in her noggin on live TV. He once again added a purple devil emoji and wrote he might hit her with his truck instead. I'm going to run that Pelosi over while she chews on her gums. Dead bitch walking. I predict that within 12 days, many in our country will die. Meredith, who is white, then texts a photo of himself in blackface. I'm going to walk around DC fucking with people by yelling Allahu Akbar randomly. This is from the Associated Press, which, if people don't know this about me, like, before I went to school for lit, I was at Mesa Press for San Diego Mesa College, and I was on their newspaper staff for 4 semesters in total. And I was editor in chief for one of the semesters. My professor was very diligent about us doing the work, getting sources, getting quotes, because you never want to be caught without it, right? You don't want to write something that you are presenting as news and then be caught when someone's trying to point it out to you and you don't have evidence to prove it. This is why, I feel like reading this like this that I read made me believe that what we saw on that Wednesday was best case scenario. Best case scenario, because I feel like when you see guys with like the zip ties, guys with all these guns, they were ready to take the Senate over and pretty much forcing them to kind of give up their lives to make sure Trump is president. And reading all this and seeing the evidence that they have lends me to believe that, what happened on Wednesday was really best case scenario.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I saw 60 Minutes today. Nancy Pelosi, she had indicated that, they broke into her office. Her young team had barricaded themselves in the office behind a table and hid, behind some chairs and hid under a table for 2.5 hours. They recorded the sounds of the mob trying to basically break into the rest of her office where they actually were in hiding. And just imagine the feeling that these individuals were, the emotions they were feeling at the time of that. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But then, Johnny, to cap this whole situation off, all of this shit went down. And yet, once Senate and the House reconvened, there were still 130 House Republicans that continued to object to the certification of the electoral votes for Joe Biden. So knowing and understanding that what they are stating or indicating as the minority chamber of Congress, meaning the Republican Party in the House, having no facts, having nothing to back up their assertions or allegations of the fact that there was widespread voter fraud, they continue to perpetrate this lie, which basically does nothing else but get people riled up and get people worried about essentially their own future. You mentioned that a lot of these people here, I mean, I'm not a person of color, so these white people here, they indicate the fact that they have a problem with the makeup of America in terms of its demographics and in terms of its ethnic background. They're afraid of being thrust into the minority. And I just kind of want to say for everyone here that no one is trying to usurp you or take your place. All we want is a more equitable America. All we want is a more equitable country. And I'll say this too, because Johnny and I, you and I were talking about, what can we do? What kind of actions can we take to kind of move on from here as well? I just want people to consider and think and understand the fact that anything that we fight for, we're fighting for you as well, right? If we're fighting for universal healthcare, we're not fighting for universal healthcare just for Democrats. If we're fighting for universal pre-K, we're fighting for universal pre-K, meaning everyone is involved. If we're fighting for voting rights, we're fighting for your rights as well. And we want people to understand that when we're talking about a democracy, we're talking about everyone, not just the people who you or the president is choosing as their electors. You can't pick and choose your electors. A democracy, a president is democratically elected. And we came so close, Johnny, as you just mentioned about the fact that this was the best case scenario. 6 people died. We came so close to seeing our democracy being snapped in half. I was talking to my wife the other night, and I don't mean to basically drone on for too long. It's shocking to me just how close this entire process has been. Although Biden beat the brakes off of Trump in the end, 306 to 232, it felt close, right? The entire time. 74 million Americans voted for this man, despite the fact that he's indirectly responsible for the death of over 350,000 Americans. But not only that, the Senate race in Georgia, I mean, it was 48-50, right? We have two men who were unlikely to actually even be in this event here. Georgia is a historically red state, hasn't been blue since 1994, if I'm not mistaken. Enter Stacey Abrams, who lost the gubernatorial race back in 2018 to Brian Kemp. And when she lost, she didn't say, well, woe is me. She basically said, you know what? I'm going to do what I can to get these people who have been disenfranchised and disempowered. I'm gonna get them power. And like you said before, Johnny, she was directly or indirectly responsible for record voter turnout. But it's like we're on the razor's edge of shit always basically just being catastrophic in this nation. And we have to find a way to where every single election, everything isn't always like a win or die situation. And how do you fix that?
Uh, well, that is going to be hard. Before I kind of answer that, one thing I will say is one of the cops that we've seen a lot of the videos on state capitol. His name was Eugene Goodman. I just want to give recognition where his due is that he has diverted a lot of what might have been a tragedy with his quick thinking. A lot of people pointed out where he kind of baited the rest of the rioters into a different section of the building because on the doorway to his left is where the senators were in that building, and if they were to go there, I think catastrophe would have happened. But with his quick thinking, kind of led them to a different area and kind of negated something that the rest of the police were locking up buildings, things like that. So just want to give credit where credit is due.
Absolutely. And can I say one more thing, Johnny? And I'm so sorry before you move
Yeah.
on this gentleman here. I just want people to look at the imagery there. A lone black man in a position of relative power, and yet still these this mob of people, they didn't accept the fact that his power was, meaning as a security guard or police officer, that his power was real or worthy or warranted. They still found it within themselves to chase this man up the stairs, to basically run him away, run him off, to basically make him feel fear in his own heart. And it's just so symbolic of the fact that even when you're a black person trying to do the right thing, or you work hard to get to where other people who don't look like you are, you're still in a position a lot of times where people don't value what position you actually are in, and they still think that they are better than you. And especially in this case here, because it was in the number of individuals who were basically chasing him up the stairs. I mean, it was a mob of people. So I just wanted to kind of just highlight the imagery for that for a moment. Just imagine yourself in a situation where you're basically being hounded by a group of men, and you have no idea what they're doing. You have no idea what their intentions are. Shout out to this man here, and he didn't shoot or kill anybody, right? Shout out to this man here. I wanted to say that, Johnny. I apologize for interrupting you.
When it comes to changing things here and how do we kind of prevent this, let's think about the macro level. And to me, the biggest thing is the discerning of fact. Politics before 2016, I feel like on both sides of the aisle, they agreed on a certain fact. They just both have different ways of viewing that fact, whether A caused B or B caused C. We're not at that place right now. It's either an all in mentality, you're either with us or against us. And we kind of have to kind of disseminate that. One of the big things is social media. I'm not saying that they have the Twitter, especially in the US, Twitter, Facebook is two of the biggest outlets out there that gets the most message across. But in our school system, college, we got to start at a young age, where we have to teach people how to fact check.
Mm-hmm.
People this day and age, at least the younger generation, and there's a lot of people that are doing really great work. If you guys are on TikTok or on Twitter, there's this lady, Emma Silverman. It's so Shade ain't so. That's her name as well. Walter Masterson. These guys are debunking every single thing that Trump supporters, writers, these people are throwing at them left and right, and they're just throwing straight facts at them in every single reply whenever they make a video or they're on Twitter, and all they're doing is googling and fact checking. Like they do it within 5 to 10 minutes, and it's simple for us because we're now used to it, but I think people back then not so much as well. But it also falls in the trap. As much as the younger generations learning it, there's other people that aren't, and they see the first thing that they see news wise that they agree with, they just run with it, right? They don't cross reference, they don't think, because they don't want to be challenged on what's going on. A lot of that is admitting whether you're right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a different educational reform, but on a whole level when it comes to this. Second thing, speaking about education, I think there's a really big retooling we need to do in schools when it comes to American history.
Mm.
Something is getting lost when it comes to this. I don't know about you, but I remembered, I don't remember a lot about US history. I know a lot of the big bullet points, but I do know that the reason why there's three different bodies, for us, the legislative, executive, and judiciary, is for checks and balances.
Right.
So that's why it shocks me when all these people are rooting for a guy when the idea is we're not supposed to give him all that much power because the other two are supposed to check and balance them.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a cynic at it, that means that you feel like nothing will ever get done because everyone's just going to cancel each other. If you're an optimist about it, I get it, because now it forces everyone to come to a compromise and work in unison. In either case, these guys kind of forget that and decided, you know what? Those courts, those judges don't make any sense. The Senate, they can't pass anything. It's all about the president, right? And I have a feeling that there's a fundamental breakdown of how, from coast to coast, that we're not teaching U.S. history the way we probably should.
Johnny, you bring up a phenomenal point there, and I'm going to plug someone who is very near and dear to me. I love basketball, as you know. That's why I'm on this podcast with you. I love you. That's why we're doing this podcast together. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the famous astrophysicist out of New York. He has a wonderful 10-minute video where he basically talks about the differences between a personal truth and an objective truth. A personal truth is something that is, again, personal to you. God, Allah is my God. Jesus is my savior. Maybe if I hadn't been intervened, or someone didn't intervene in my life at that particular moment, I would have died of, drinking too much alcohol. That's a personal truth to you. But there are also objective truths. There are things that are true in the universe, and there is no way to actually challenge these truths. It is either true or it is not. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, right? It is the number one element on our periodic table. It's the most abundant element. That is an objective truth, and there is no way to debunk that unless there is new science. Now, here's the thing. Science is a living and breathing world and field where you have people, as Johnny, you just stated, you're always constantly checking and debunking things, right? And if someone comes up with something new, a new hypothesis, a new theory. Basically, the challenge for the scientific community is to actually go after that and try to debunk it. And if they can't debunk it, it becomes a universal truth. That, in tandem with what you were just mentioned a moment ago regarding U.S. history, is what I really think is missing from this organization. If you give me a second, I want to read this to you as well. One of the things that I think is missing in the education pipeline in America is training. A class, if you will. You wouldn't need this every year, but every couple of years, a class on what science is and how it works. The science classes we take are topics driven, and you expect, here's your chemistry class, here's your biology class. Maybe there's a physics and earth science, and there's a book and they give you a test on what's inside the book. Then you move on as though it's just another topic like English or history. The difference is that in science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of wiring the brain that empowers you to probe whether something is real or not in this world. If you do not have the power to judge that, to judge what is true and to what is not as true, then you might think that science is just one way of thinking things and saying, hey, here's this other way of thinking things, and there's no difference between the two. And I choose to believe this, and I choose not to believe that. This is what's happening in politics right now, as you just alluded to, Johnny. You have people who are choosing to believe what is purveyed to them and served to them on a silver platter. And as you and I have talked about in this conversation today, people choosing to get their facts from only certain sources of echo chambers of people who think like them. We need to encourage people. You can't make them, but to encourage people to not only have multiple sources of things, but to also challenge their own thinking and their own way of something. Because if something seems too good to be true, then it probably is. If something is too convenient, then it probably is. Go out there, people. We're encouraging you, right? We're not a educational podcast per se, but we definitely do, want the takeaways for everyone to be here to empower yourself with knowledge. And I understand that we're talking about a pretty somber and macabre topic today, but this has been a really challenging week for the country as a whole. So we challenge you to go out there and empower yourselves and to learn from multiple sources and not just the places where it's most convenient.
Let me tell you guys, like, you don't have to just read CNN.
Mm.
Like, I feel like everything, buddy, that thinks of like, oh, left's crazy, CNN. Look, I love NPR. And the reason why I'll tell you I love NPR is because for the most part, they are the last to report everything. And sometimes in this news cycle, it seems really dead to be last. But the reason why they are is because they really fact checked everything,
Yeah.
right? 99.9% of the stuff that NPR puts out, they're not retracting any of that. It's because they dotted their I's, crossed their T's. They really do that.
They did the
I would
work.
correct. I would also suggest you guys, if you want to try something else new, go read The Guardian, Vox. Shoot, go to BBC. I swear to you, like you'll see different points of view where they're a little bit more substantiated and they kind of do the work that's going there. I wouldn't touch Fox News with like a freaking like 10-foot pole, to be honest with you guys. And that's also OANN and all that other shit because they they are very they're very driven on their opinion and not enough facts. I will say this about Fox News: when they knew they were about to maybe get sued from Dominion, they retracted all that shit, right?
Right.
So that's how you know that they still realize that they could be liable for a lot of this stuff. Now that's talking about kind of like the big picture. So I'll ask you first, John, on the micro level, on your day to day life, like what do we need to do just for us in general, for us to not have something like this happen again?
Well, in the COVID world, I'm privileged, Johnny, to work from home. So my interactions, my personal or in person interaction with people are very minimal, and I'm again very privileged and thankful for being able to say that. But what I think we can do is, if we are going to maintain an online presence, it's to maybe turn the volume down just a little bit. And what I mean by that is, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay if someone tells you something that is counter to what you thought was true, and for you to take that at some sort of face value and say, okay, or take that challenge and not be upset or frustrated or pissed off about it, and then retreat again to your own echo chamber, but to actually take it as a learning opportunity and say, oh shit, you know what? I learned something new today. Today I learned. There was a situation earlier this year where Stan Van Gundy, again following the death of George Floyd, came out and he made a comment on Twitter, and he said blacks, right? He said something 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 blacks, and he didn't refer to them as black people or black men or women or African American. Because there is a distinction between a black person and an African American person. A black person will also encompass people who are from Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, not African American who come from the country of Africa and are here in America. And I said, some people were dunking on Stan Van Gundy, and I thought that he had good intentions. And I said, hey, coach, it's okay if you refer to us as blacks. And someone said, hey, Jonathan, hey, J Speedo 4, the issue that we're taking with SVG is not the fact that he is saying blacks, is that he basically didn't say the blacks or black people. He didn't put people following that. And you know what I said? Oh shit, you're right. My bad. And I got a bunch of different replies in that thread from people basically saying, "Oh my God, you never see this on Twitter." Someone saying that they learned something, or they apologize for being incorrect, or they apologize for the perception of being incorrect. And I think that's something that we can really do. It's okay for someone to correct you if they know something more than you. It's okay for someone to challenge your thought. That's a good thing. We can turn the volume down a little bit, stop retreating to our echo chambers about things, and actually have real civil discourse with people. That's one of my ways, Johnny.
I agree with you. And to piggyback off that, there's two things. One, when it comes to family, I, you know, half of my family are Vietnamese, right? English is not their number one language, just as Vietnamese is not my number one language. And I have to be able to find a barrier to kind of talk about politics where they can understand where I'm coming from. Because I actually understand where they're coming from, right? But I can't be able to reciprocate that message to them to make them feel the same way. And that's on me to find a way, either when it comes to finding Vietnamese news outlets or translated, or just information that I can easily digest for, to get them to digest for themselves so they can understand where I'm coming from. But this is another level, and I talked to Dakota about this as well. And it makes me think about kind of, your kid Roman here. I've told her I'm going to make this commitment. And the commitment really is that there will always be a winner and loser in something that he's going to do. Whether it's playing video games, playing sports, he or she, sorry, I shouldn't really classify it right because I have no yet. Board games, it's debates.
Mm-hmm.
There'll always be a winner or loser. And there will be one time they will lose. And they're going to feel that anger. Trust me, if you've been competitive in any level, or just prideful in some of the things you do, losing hurts. It really does. But we're not saying those feelings are invalid. They're actually valid. You have the right to feel that way. My biggest thing is, why do you feel that way?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that way because you didn't study hard enough? You weren't ready for their counter arguments. Maybe they were just better, naturally gifted, or maybe they worked on their craft more. But if the words out of their mouth are, I feel cheated, it was taken from me, any along those lines, I'm going to stop them right then and there. Because I'm going to ask them, show me how.
Mm-hmm.
Show me the proof. Because I think this is where we see a lot of people, like, they feel cheated, but they don't know why. And they're trying to blame it on somebody because it's not, they don't want it to blame on themselves. And having that kind of accountability is kind of the biggest thing that I want to teach my child. Because if they can understand that and learn that if they did everything right, or maybe they didn't prepare enough, if they feel cheated in those certain things, but they have some validation, right? Then I agree with them. But if they're just doing it because they're frustrated, I'm going to take that out of them, because that's not something how you should feel. And that's how we've gotten to this point. But that's kind of how I want to kind of impact on a future level, but on a present level as well.
Yeah, let me just agree with that as well. I know that we're coming probably towards our time here, but I want to agree with everything you just said. It's just add to that as well that it's okay to lose every once and again. Those are character building moments, and what can you take from that to prepare yourself for the invariable next time you will find yourself in a similar situation, so that when you find yourself in that situation in the future, you're not caught flat-footed again. I think that that is a phenomenal tool and way of thinking to challenge someone on, why do you feel that you've been cheated out of something? What evidence or proof do you have? And if you don't have it, then it's actually a personal shortcoming. And let's address that shortcoming.
So as we end this podcast, rather than ending with our top five, we came up with another list, this list that actually is self-made, of the people that voted against certifying the election. These people, I believe, have caused with Trump this, riot to happen on our federal building and on our Capitol. If you are in any of these states, shoot, if you have Twitter, write to them, tweet at them. We believe these 8 senators should resign as of today. So, John, give us the 8 senators that voted against certification.
From the top down: Ted Cruz of Texas, Josh Hawley of Missouri, Cindy Hyde Smith, Mississippi, Cynthia Loomis of Wyoming, and forgive me, Loomis of Wyoming, John Kennedy of Louisiana, not John F. Kennedy, John Kennedy, Roger Marshall of Kansas, Rick Scott of Florida, and Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. As Johnny stated, if you're one of these people here, you should resign. You should resign from office.
Thanks for listening, guys.